Language isn't, of course, only a means of communication. It's often key to how we think, how we learn. It's almost a cliche now to talk about India's great cultural and language diversity as a result. But what are we doing about it? How are we leveraging it? And of course, like so many of you have been writing in to say, how about talking a little about our pursuit of English? That's what we're looking at today, a very special panel with me. Let me get onto it right away and introduce them. Dr. James Simpson with us, author and editor. Alison Barrett, she's Global Head English for Education Systems at British Council. Ajit Mohanty, Chief Advisor of the National Multilingual Education Resort Consortium at JNU. And Osama Manzar, who is a social entrepreneur, author and speaker. Thanks so much for taking our time to speak to us today. Dr. Simpson, let me start by asking you. Now, we've got the 2001 census for India identified over 1,600 what it described as mother tongues, grouping it into around 120 odd languages. The numbers are rather mind-boggling when you know and the difference. They're not just sort of different dialects, but these are really different, robust languages. Do you believe that we are acknowledging or taking note of our diversity and doing enough to make sure that these traditions, these language traditions, carry on for years and years to come?
It's a very good question. My sense is that languages will always be with us, diversity will always be with us, and linguistic diversity will carry on increasing, will continue, and so on. My sense is that we have to recognize that language use is very, very diverse, and that recognition needs to be more and better and more firmly established in policy circles. So you note hundreds of different mother tongues. In policy circles, only a very small number of those are valued in any way. The other thing that is not necessarily recognized as it should be perhaps is how the different languages combine with each other in actual language use on the ground. So there's a tendency to think about language A, English, language B, Hindi, language C, maybe another local but fairly big language in policy, in education, but in practice things are very, very different. And that's in practice things are quite different. Ajit Mohanty, come in here, sir. Because in the north, we're talking about, Dr. Simpson are talking about the three-language formula. Now, in the north, you'll see that the states would rather go, or schools would rather go with Hindi, English, and say Sanskrit. And perhaps they should be learning or thinking about, say, a language from the south. In the south, you'll see that there'll be no Hindi, and they'll do two languages, perhaps regional languages. So there seems to be no consensus.
Well, the three-language formula has failed. It has created more confusion than solving anything at all. And then I think we nationally we are doing very little to recognize the diversity. In spite of the constitutional provision for mother tongue based education for the minorities, and also commission after commission, report after report, and the policy after policy, education was supposed to be imparted in mother tongues for children. National Curricular Framework 2005 talked about mother tongue education, in fact made it mandatory. But right after that, 2009 Right to Education Act said education will be in the mother tongue as far as practicable. Then 2011, the national policy on early childhood education talks about mother tongue as the necessary medium for early childhood education. So what are we doing? We are working cross purpose, and there is a confusion actually.
Osama Manzar, come in here at this stage. There seems to be confusion. Is there seems to be confusion? There seems to be no consensus. You're sort of it's up to you to learn what you learn. As a result, there are so many people, especially in say urban India, children like mine, who are learning English and Hindi, and that's it. Now that's of course a tiny pocket of urban India, but how do you see the situation panning out?
If I can take the entire language debate from education system and economic system to the culture of language and the language of culture. We have been suffering the language of culture, in fact. The language of culture is skills, jobs, English in that direction, and we are basically trying to learn a language which can give me a job, which can give me a status, which can give me a power and all that.
And there's no debate on what that language is anymore.
Exactly,
Right,
and that's one side of the story.
Right.
The second side of the story, that we have 196 Indian endangered languages, by the way. 196 endangered languages listed on Wikipedia as Indian endangered languages. Now
that's the highest for any country in the world.
any
I can
country.
imagine that, right,
Yeah.
right.
But what I'm trying to say is that bring them to a digital technology, because language at the end of is a medium of communication that you communicate
Right.
among peer group,
Right.
and and then challenges of others.
Right.
But written medium in the last thousands of years has taken over our psyche, so we think that anybody who is writing is actually literate, educated. I am extremely educated, but not able to write. That doesn't mean that I'm illiterate. I'm uneducated.
Alison, come in here. I'd hoped to sort of bring in English a little later, but there's no getting away from the fact that this is the language that is, or the key means. It's not even seen only as a language. It's a key means for, say, upward mobility, about access, about opportunity in the country, whether I want a good education, whether I want a good job, whether I just want to be cool and speak English. There's just absolutely no getting away with that. How do you see it playing out in a country like India?
You're absolutely right. I mean, there's something like 1 in 4 people now globally speak English, and there's a huge groundswell of demand. Parents in India are moving children away from vernacular medium schools and enrolling them in English medium schools because they perceive the potential benefits that could accrue with English that you just mentioned.
Right.
But the challenge is, how can we help parents understand the potential risks with that kind of move, and how can we help them valorize their own, ensure that their own languages are considered important. And,
Right.
and
I just want to sort of interrupt there, because I think the point that you're making is that it doesn't have to be either or.
Yes,
You can
absolutely.
go together. You can sort of learn more than one language.
You're absolutely right. And I think that the confusion that Professor Mohanty was talking about around the 3 language formula is played out in language classrooms across the country all the time. I mean, I've been very fortunate to observe many teachers across the country teaching English, and the way English is taught tends to be quite formulaic. It tends to be very text-based, very literature-based. There's a very strong focus on repetition, on production, but not on authentic communication and meaning making and understanding. And that's where I think that teachers really need support in how they can improve their own language proficiency, so they can feel more confident teaching children, but also the skills and practices that they need to be able to use the languages of their classroom as a resource to help improve language ability in all languages, not just in English.
Right. Dr. Simpson, come in here, because one of the things that Alison's spoken about is that, at what cost are you getting all these students ready to sort of speak English? But of course, all those studies that say 25% of primary school students, when they start off, face severe to moderate stress because they don't understand the language, and sort of English is being dumped down to them. We know that in certain pockets of India, far away from the urban centers, we like to call our school convents, because we believe that that implies sort of that English is sort of built in. And the quality of education is really under doubt. The quality of English training in particular is under doubt, because we're not sure if teachers are equipped to impart this kind of knowledge.
That's right, and Professor Mohanty will talk more about that, I'm sure. But I think that there's a fairly fundamental question about the status of English and how English is recognized in broad society and across the population. And I would suggest that the power and the benefits of English are, to an extent, they're misrecognized. That is to say, people assume that once you have English, all your problems are solved. I live and work in the UK and in the city of Leeds in the north of England, where we receive large numbers of migrants from different countries. And these people very frequently will say to me, once I have English, I will be able to get a job, I'll be able to get this education, and so on and so forth. And it's not necessarily the case.
That is an important point. Mr. come in here, and then I'll get Osama Manzur in. There are still lots of people in India who would believe that. That this is what I need. I will go to all these learn English overnight or whatever it is, 2-week, 3-week classes. The Rapidex English speaking course was, for the longest time, very sort of, it was a hot selling property in India. And the fact is that those who sort of are not proficient with the language feel that they are at a disadvantage?
Well, actually what's happening is people believe that English will go for, will cause emancipation, will cause development. That's not necessarily true. But unfortunately 40% of our children are already in English medium school. But what kind of English medium schools? You have very prestigious high quality schools where English is taught, but large number of English medium schools teach English in Hindi or in one of the local languages. So, I have called this category of schools range from doom schools to doom schools, because there are many schools where children are bound to fail, because the education is so poor, and as was said rightly, the quality of teaching of English is extremely poor in certain schools. Therefore, there are many schools where children will neither learn English nor learn the subject matter.
Usama Mansur, but even despite all that, and that might be the reality check, despite all that, since 2009 there's been a 50% jump in English medium schools in India. This is the government's own data. So, are we looking at quality, or is quantity enough for us?
I think we are not looking at quality at all. So, when you talk of language, you always talk of quality, treat language as a culture, So, what English is basically people are learning is because they need a job and they want to look cool, I mean what you call, but even that one is going to vanish very soon, because all the digital medium is transforming the local languages to just adopt English as a Roman, means to say your own language, from WhatsApp to Facebook to everything. You are just doing Roman or a keyboard as a Roman means of communicating. So, it's only the job or maybe a medium of instruction in the school and colleges that is being adapted. I don't think English anybody is looking at to enhance your language skill or enhance your capacity to read literature or something in the world. So, the world in the last 50 years has been job oriented, skill oriented, livelihood, skills and all those things. And this language incidentally has played a very critical role in worldwide, because of the trade, because of the economy, because of the world policy or whatever, that people are adopting that language.
I think it's really interesting that Osama's talking about skills and job opportunities, and we've been looking at the vocational sector over the last year or so, and working with the National Skills Development Agency, and what we found is that English, or a very small amount of English, is often required by many employers, even for quite vocational tasks like plumbers or carpenters, etc. And the reasons they're giving is that because of the growth of the internet, because of the way that services are being accessed now by the growing middle classes in India, that they need to be able to communicate in very simple, basic English with tradesmen, service people, to be able to access their services. And so there's a need for English at all levels of employment, not just at the more professional white collar, organised sector, that in the unorganised sector as well, that it's a requirement. But the challenge is that sometimes employers are perhaps requiring a higher level of English that's needed. So English is perhaps becoming a barrier to recruitment for some people. And so it's about identifying how much English is needed, what kind of English is needed. You don't need to be able to speak a particular British variety or an American variety of English if you're going to be working in Bhubaneswar or Kerala, for example. You need enough English to be able to access that employment, that opportunity. And that's where I think you were referring to English becoming a tool, which on the one hand you could see is dangerous for the language, because you're using it in an instrumental way just to access some particular economic gain. But if that's what those people need, then that's fine.
I just wanted to actually get you in on another point. There are all those, perhaps the cynics, who would say, look at China, look at Japan, look at where they got without the use of English. China, of course, now trying to catch up, really, and all of that. But for someone who would sort of make that point to you, what would you say?
I think it's about looking at education more broadly, looking at the quality of education and what you can do to improve that across the board. You can't, not rather than just drilling down and focusing on one particular aspect, it's about that breadth of response, thinking about the system, the education system as a whole, and how you can support teachers so they can become better, how you can improve the curriculum, the assessments.